Okay, so I am Carla Kopp. I am a game designer, developer, and publisher, and I am here with the wonderful Emma Larkins. She has designed Abandon All Artichokes, Heartcatchers, and Then We Died. She also runs this amazing Seattle playtesting meetup that does playtesting every Wednesday night. That is actually more than just Seattle. If you're anywhere, you can be there. But Emma Larkins can tell us more about herself right now if she feels like it.
Yeah, no, that was an amazing intro. Yeah, the Discord, the playtesting is all done digitally. We used to meet in person in Seattle. Of course, that's not a thing right now. Pros and cons, because our group has expanded enormously to be people from all over the world. It's very exciting. Get a lot of great playtesting done. The community is fabulous. One of my favorite things about the group, I was just talking to Carla before we went live here, that there's a lot of online conventions and different ways for people to connect now, but I feel like my group is so great and warm and welcoming that it brings me joy and fills my needs for connecting and play testing. We get a lot of games tested there. So yeah, that's me. The only other thing is I do a podcast called Dudeology, where I'm a co-host. It's about games. You probably heard about it.
Yes, that is very important. I am very sad that I forgot about that because we were talking about that beforehand.
I have a lot of things. Whenever I do my thing, I say my spiel, and the next person is like, "I don't have that many things." I'm like, "It's more. It sounds like more than it is. It's not. It's fine. It's too many."
I mean, I get that too because once you've been in the industry for so long, you just start doing all these things. You're like, oh,
Right,
I'm
right.
on a podcast. There it is. I want
Yeah.
to prove.
Oops, all podcasts. Carla, it's an important point that you mentioned to newer designers. They might not realize that at a certain point in your career, you just get a podcast. You just have one issued to you, and then all of a sudden you're doing a podcast. It's just how it goes.
Yeah, I mean, who doesn't have a podcast? Who is it? Like Stephen Bonacore just got his podcast.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
took him a long time though.
Yeah, so, yeah.
Longer than normal.
Right.
But anyway, we are here to talk about game feel, which is I think a very important topic. But a lot of people don't really think about how a game feels. So can you kind of tell us what you mean by game feel and why it's important?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is something I've really been noodling on probably for the last year or so, and working to build some context and language around, because most of the time in playtesting, we'll talk about the theme of the game, the mechanics of the game, how those things intertwine, what players are doing at a certain time, the stuff that you find in the rules. But what the rules and the mechanics and the components, what it's all coming together to do is provide an experience. And that experience will have a feel to it, or a feeling. I think I do want to clarify right off the bat, feeling is not necessarily emotions. I think we have a lot of weight around the word feel. It's like, I feel happy, I feel sad. So when I talk about game feel, I'm not talking specifically about those types of emotions. It's a little bit more of a mechanical thing. So for example, just want to talk about a couple of games to build out the idea of what I'm talking about here. You look at a game like Magic the Gathering, which I've been playing a ton of lately, right? There's the opening of it, facing off against your opponent, the tension. You draw your first 7 cards, right? And it's good or it's bad for you. There's a lot of really high stakes moment to that. And there's an escalation as the game progresses, right? You can see yourself winning or losing. And it's all very activated, emotional feel to it. There's a lot of drama and adrenaline to it. Contrast that to a game like Takedo, right, which is a much more consistent game feel, which coincidentally really leans into the theme for Takedo, which is a game about traveling across the Japanese countryside, going around painting landscapes, sitting in hot springs, eating delicious food. And the game feels like that, right? You're moving down this track. There's a little competition, but there isn't that same intense activation. And I could go across a lot of games and talk about this. And I'm sure we'll talk about more over the course of the show. But that's in a nutshell what I mean when I talk about the feel of a game.
Okay, so why even talk about the feel of a game? Like, what are like some like reasons to do so?
Yeah. I think for more for heavier hobbyist gamers, if you're making very complex mechanical games, it's I don't know if I want to say a little less important, but there are definitely people who uh, focus on the mechanics of a game, and it's about that is a feel in itself. I want to sit down, I want to put my brain through the ringer. I want to have all this stuff going on. It almost gets you into a state of flow, right? Which can be another feel. But I think for most gamers, especially a lot of newer gamers coming into it, the feel is what hits them to it. The mechanics, they can't necessarily express and say, oh, I like a deck builder game, or I like a card shedding game, or like a trick taking game. Instead, before you get to that language, you will express it and say the kinds of things you like. Like I like poker because there's a lot of I never know exactly what's going to happen. I don't know who's exactly going to win. That's a very luck-based game. So again, like with Magic, there's a lot of drama, tension, adrenaline to it. And someone else might say, I like chess because I can sit and really plan everything out, and if I lose, it's my fault, basically, right? Like there isn't any luck involved with it. So for most players who are going to play your game, the feel is what hits them, and it's often the hardest part for players and play testers to communicate. The language we have around it isn't super granular. A lot of times it comes down to, was it fun or not, right? And like that's such a hard term to unpack what exactly that means. And really what it is does the experience, does the feel that was provided to them line up with their expectations? And theme can speak to this and inform this often. This is when you see a mismatch between a theme and a feel, for example. You could have something, talk about like a knitting game. If I was to think about a knitting game, I think about my experience of knitting, sitting by the fire. It's cozy, it's slow, progressive. At the end of it, I've created a thing, and if you pitched a knitting game to some players, say, hey, we're going to knit, that's probably the experience. And then it's cutthroat, like you're like stealing other people's stuff and, throwing people's projects on the floor and stuff. That probably isn't going to be the feeling that they expected from it. So mechanics can inform the feel, theme can inform the feel, but it is kind of almost this amorphous thing that comes from putting all these pieces together, but it's very visceral and it very much determines the reaction that people have to your game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was so much very important information. Like when you were talking about like new gamers, like choosing the right game for them, like I think that can matter like so much. But like even for like me as a gamer, like now, like I'll be in a certain mood. Like
Yeah.
there's plenty of games that I can enjoy if I'm in the mood for it. Like I
Yeah.
will enjoy it so much more. And like we can talk about these words like the way theme mechanics, but like if we talk about like you brought up Takedo, like Takedo is like that perfect, like the theme matches the experience so well. It's really calm, like you can kind of like not pay all that much attention between your turns because you just make a simple turn, you do your thing and it goes on. And yeah, if we could somehow analyze like games by game feel and also have that on the box,
Yeah.
like I think we would get like everyone would just be so much happier because like it's that whole like expectation that you bring up. Where like I buy a game because I expect it, like maybe I'm passionate about space, so I buy a space game and then I start playing it and it's like, oh yeah, this is just pasted on, or there's some other thing that wasn't on the box to tell me that, maybe I should not have bought this. But like, if we can target people to buy the games that they'll love, then everyone will be so much happier.
Yeah, and you can't necessarily tell from um, art and theme and components, because I'm thinking of two card-based games, right? Take Abandon All Artichokes and Arboretum, right? I don't know if y'all played Arboretum before, but it is a brutal, brutal game. Like, this is a game, and it's beautiful art. I think it's the Beth Sobel Trees version. I have the fancy version of it, and I do enjoy the game, but it's a game of attrition where people are putting things down, and you realize at the end of it, if I don't have these right things, I could get nothing. So it's just the feel, it strikes you. I want to talk a little bit about experience curves in a moment, because that's an important part. Like, experience changes over time, or feel changes over time for different games. But in games of attrition, I think Tiny Towns is in this as well, right? There's games where you have less and less to work with, and it becomes more and more set in stone over time until it's almost a feel. It can feel good, but it's a little bit of feel of dread, right? So when you're playing Arboretum, you're like, if I get this card, it's great, but if I don't, I'm screwed. As opposed to another card hand management game, Abandon All Artichokes, you're playing the stuff. It's exciting. You're looking at the things. There's a feeling of bounty to it, right? Because you're getting more stuff. You're the engine builder feel, right? You're building things up over time. So two games that on the surface, if you weren't as experienced, you say like, oh, they both have cards in the hands. They probably feel similarly, but they can feel incredibly different.
I think like that's a really important thing that you brought up, like the escalation, because like, yeah, like Tiny Towns, like I know a lot of people love it, but like I hate it. I hate it so much because like somebody else can like say a color and it'll be like, no, it's all ruined.
Yeah.
Or they could say a color and it's like, yes, like it gets so exciting towards the end, like if it goes in your favor. But like I would rather like the constant build up. Where like, oh, okay, if I don't like continue building up, at least I still got to this high point. I won't just like fall to my death.
Yeah.
But like knowing that, like having like an icon for that on a box, like for the people that need that like adrenaline rush, like they will snatch that game up immediately if we had, a way to talk about that.
Absolutely.
So there's the escalation and the experience curve. Did you want to talk any more about the experience curve?
Yeah. So an important thing, we framed a little bit about game feel, and definitely open to questions at the end of this, because I'm still feeling out these words, as it were. So the language, I'm excited to develop around this. But for the experience curve, we've talked about these things, Magic, Tiny Towns, Tokaido, how they feel, but most games, and I would say most good games, feel differently throughout the course of the game. So look at a game like Magic the Gathering. You are sitting, and I would say it's still in the Magic circle. You've sat down across from your opponent, shuffling your cards. There's a feeling of excitement, like uncertainty to it. Then you draw your hand of cards, and you could feel, oh, I've got the perfect cards. I've got the lands I need, and I can play these spells. I've got my plan. So you can feel like, okay, I feel good. I feel confident and in control. Or you could draw those 7 cards, and it could be the worst. You could get 6 lands or no lands, or just like all things that you can't cast for 10 turns. And that's a very different feel, right? Very exact same game, exact same deck, components, everything, but incredibly different feel. And then again, throughout that, it's very granular, whether you're, every time you draw a card, whether you really need something, or you're like, I'm fine, I don't really care, I got a handful of cards, or you're top decking, right? And you're just desperate to get that answer. There's one thing in your deck that will save you. So it's, Magic is very much like up and down, just bouncy. But the overall shape of the curve is going towards a climax, right? It will come to a conclusion, and either quickly or slowly. It's very much that ramping up. Whereas a game like Takedo has a very more consistent curve, and it's more like this, like waves almost, because you're going along and you come to a city and there's phases. It's cyclical almost, right? It's like, and now this happens, and now we kind of reset, go along, and now this happens. And then a game of attrition like Arboretum or Tiny Towns, it's almost like a downward compressing and compacting. Even some abstract strategy games like chess, to some extent, if you can see into the future and see like, oh wait, I made a mistake. Everything, the walls are closing in on me. There's very little chance or no chance for me to come back, and just this feeling of the things closing in on you, which I find kind of a stressful feeling. But for the person on the flip side of that, the opponent playing it, for them, there's a feeling of execution and mastery, right? For these types of games, if you do manage to pull everything off, it's not the engine building or the combo where things are growing and I have more and more options. I have fewer and fewer options, but yeah, that sense of like my tableau has been created, like the last, like a puzzle almost, I've put the last piece into the puzzle. So just a few different examples of experience curves, and something to consider for your game. What parts of it are exciting, what parts of it are, they can't all be exciting. If every single moment it's like, I drew a card and now I have to do a thing and my opponent's doing a thing, it's just everything is dialed up to 11, right? Then nothing is dialed up to 11, right? It kind of loses some of its meaning. So having these contrast moments in your game where, and it can be on your turn, right? Everything is happening on my turn. It's very exciting. And then on other people's turns, I get a step back, feel a different feeling and a different experience as I'm watching people do their stuff, or maybe they're screwing me over, right? And then I'm mad, and then out of control, in control. There's all these different factors that go into how people feel throughout the course of playing a game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I definitely agree with that about the like you can't have everything be exciting. I think it was Eric Slauson who I was talking to, where we talked about like downtime can actually be like a really good thing if it adds in that tension.
Yeah.
Like it gives you like a moment to think before you get back into that exciting portion of it. Where I've never thought of as downtime as like a good thing until then.
Yeah.
But, yeah. So another way we tend to talk about games a lot is the weight, like the light, the medium, the heavy. But this weight can be a lot of different things brought together. Like I know, well, a good example if you played both Fort by Leader Games and SQPF. I think I got that acronym right. Like
some combination of letters, yeah.
Yeah, it's a combination of letters. It's a game. But these two games are like it's by the same designer, but very different art. Okay.
Yeah.
The thing that's different is the art. But for me, Fort, I can play. I can play so easily. But the other one, I just had to give up mid game because it was too heavy. And the only thing different was the art. So like how and that's not in the weight or anything like, at all.
Yeah.
Like, well, because the weight is just like, it is what it is. Like, it's light, medium, heavy. You can go like mid-weight or light, medium, or whatever. But talking about weight, is there anything you've thought of to like break weight into like different components, like so you can really talk about it? Because like well, with the escalation curve, that's part of it a little. Because like if something is like very intense, it's going to be a heavier weight most likely.
Yeah. That's absolutely a perfect point, and I love that because I haven't played SPQF. I have played Fort, and there's a lot of what I like to call readability to it, or again, words. I'm like, I want to find the words for this thing. There's a lot of theme-informed mechanics that make logical sense to us as humans, right? And I think it's fascinating that you do say that there is so much work that a good theme can do to take a game from being ultra heavy to being medium, or like light medium. Like there's so much you can do to shift that curve. So for Fort, and a lot of it comes to the art, a lot of it comes to the way the mechanics are themed, a lot of it comes to the rule book. You know, everything is written in pretty friendly terms. So you're building your fort, right? You have your hands of cards. The UI and the UX too can do a huge amount of work here. I have my mat, right, where I put my cards, and there's a space here that looks like a rectangle, and my card looks like a rectangle. So like we learned when we were 3, right? Like square, some of us is a little hard. The square peg goes into the square hole. So that is something that's affordances. I think that's the word I'm looking for. Very clear affordances for how you're supposed to place things and how you're supposed to do things, and the friendliness to it, right? Like these are your friends or your team. You're building your team, and gosh, there's so many subtle things to it too. It's like kids on the playground, right? Like I'm building my team, they're over here, but some of them are going to go over there because they have a cooler fort, right? I'm going to put mine out, and some of them are going to desert, and then I'm recruiting more people in. So there's just so much that goes into this, and I think uh, a lot of designers theme can be tough, and I know a lot of newer designers go a little more athematic in their design, especially people who come from more, as with myself to some degree, more of an engineering background or a more like mathematical background, and we're interested in, you know, how things function and fit together. But I think theme is great, and I would love to see, like I talked about the knitting game. I think there's so many experiences that can provide their language, right, to the mechanics for knit or for weaving, right? Like you're putting your cards like over and under and layering things. You know, there's words and language that we already know that we can translate into the world of games. So yeah, I think for feel and weight and communicating those things, and as you said too, weight can be so different for a game. Like if you look at Rising Sun and complexity versus Concordia, right? Like Rising Sun, making alliances, moving things around, area control. Concordia, hand management, resources, uh, all these pieces coming together. Like there's the level of complexity, which is kind of how long does it take for me to explain the rules for a gamer with a certain level of experience? How long will it take them to figure it out? But just saying, like, these are two medium games, they can still have a completely different feel to them, right? Or even something like Funkoverse, right? Funkoverse versus Undaunted, or different, or War Chest, right? Different area control combat tactics games, right? The similar feel to them, but a variety of different themes and weights and settings. So I think mostly I would love just to have more ways of talking about these things. Just it's all intersections, right? It's not just how heavy is it, how long is it, how many players can it play. It's, you know, the specific mechanics of it, and then how it all comes together in a package to generate an experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Like, if we could just have like 10 things that we just know about a game when we pick it
Mm,
up, like, well, like the player count and the time, those are definitely good and they're on most boxes. But like, even having the concept of like, how much does this game help you play it?
yeah. Oh yeah, yeah.
Like, and what I mean by that is like, does it have reference cards? Does it have a quick start guide? Does it have like a setup picture? Like well, you talked about in Fort, where like you have that player board and you have the front where it tells you where to put your cards, and it's like here, look out, and it has like all those little helper things. Like so, if you like don't play it for a year and then you put it in front of you, you're like, well, I still know how to read,
Yeah.
so just read it
Yeah.
and you're great. Um, and if I could just know that, like, well, because like some days we're tired. If I could go to my bookshelf and be like, oh, this game has a helper function of 5, that's where I am right now. I need that. I can't handle like a 1. Like I have to help myself and remember all the things, and
Yeah.
Like a lot of the cognitive load is just like, oh yeah, what can I do on my turn?
Yeah. And no judgment here, right? Like, this is something, again, I have opinions on these things, but as I continue on my designer journey, I try to open up more and more about that. And there's people who absolutely love, I think you said the one on the scale would be like 10 would be whole, like the game basically plays itself, and one would be no help whatsoever. And there's people who love one games, right? There's people who just want to fuddle through the Twilight struggle rule book, right? And just like, I'm not even gonna watch the video, I'm gonna figure this out. That's very much an experience that people are looking for in a game. And there's people or groups who you might play with if they even like a trick taking game, or some games like you don't even have choices, right? With like you just put this card down, or it's like llama, right? A very simple card game is like, well, I have this card, it matches the number, this is the only thing I can do on my turn. Like that would be on the other end of the spectrum, where it's just like, this, I literally don't have to think about what I'm doing. And there's a whole spectrum of experiences there. Different people like different ones, and it would be great to be able to communicate that, like you said.
Mm-hmm. So we've talked about a variety of ways, like these ways to talk about game feel. What do you think about like having like maybe a subject matter area where like okay, like we both played Calico.
Mm,
You don't need to know about quilting to play Calico.
yeah.
But what if there was like games where like if you did know a lot about quilting, you're probably gonna win.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think it comes more into play again because I think that there are not nearly enough thematic games, like a horse riding board game, right? Where if you're just like, I've never ridden a horse before, sadly, but if you had ridden horses all your life, you'd be really good at this game. I would love to see more thematics brought in such a way that you could parse the games very quickly based on your background understanding. But where we see it more often is mechanical things, right? Like I've played this sort of game before, so I can parse this very quickly. Like with a deck builder, there's a lot of language there for the deck, discard, trash, market, all these words that we're used to. And yeah, it's interesting because they use these language mechanics themes on Board Game Geek, right? If you go there, you can see them classified. But I know Jeff Engelstein and Isaac Shalev, I think, did the book recently that broke them down. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but there are people working to codify these things a little more. But I really think it's not necessarily doable in a word, deck builder or resource management. I think having a sentence or like a language, a way of putting words together where like, deck wrecking, deck builder with elements of this. I think if you put the language together into a description with a bunch of words, that it will make more sense than trying to cram like, this is what a deck builder is and this is what a deck builder isn't. And there's just so much gradation. Games, there's so many subtle differences. Like I have friends working on games like, well, it's not really a deck builder because of this, and this reason. I'm like, well, but it is kind of a deck builder for this, and this reasons. So yeah, I mean, building up more language around that. And I think just leaning into it, and for designers to understand and respect how important the feel and experience is. Again, I think in a lot of ways, this industry is kind of in our infancy, where we don't have a lot of research or language or meta analysis of the stuff that we love, right? Often you look to critics to kind of like build this out and really have a way to describe these kinds of things. So I think it's something that we can do more for the back of the box description, right? Usually it's flavorful. Say like, hey, Abandon All Artichokes, right? This isn't your garden variety card game. I love the description on the back of Abandon All Artichokes, but And I think the humor and lightness of it communicates some things, but I definitely think that as designers and publishers, we can look to new ways to communicate that information.
Hmm. Yeah, I really wish like we just had like a set list of things to talk about.
Mm.
I think like in the book that you mentioned, I talked to Daniel Solis about a couple weeks ago where he did all the graphic design for that. And one of the things I'm really like looking forward to reading that book for is that they identified words for all the different areas.
Oh,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, so just knowing, like, if every board gamer just knew all these words, like, the definitions were there, like, explaining how game works could be so easy because it could be like, "Oh, okay, so the area in front of you is a certain word," like, when a card, you've used it once and you can't use it again until your next turn, like, "Oh, yeah, this is just a word also."
Hmm.
If we all had this shared language, then everything would be easy. And well, I mean, it'd be kind of hard to get into the industry a little, but like if you just had your little dictionary, like that you just carried around, like your little phrase guide, like you do
Yeah,
when you travel.
right. Your translation guide.
Yeah.
But you make a really good point there. The when an industry or gets to a point where they start to create a lot of internal language, it can be harder for people to get into that, to break into it, because we're all speaking in this, and as designers, right, play testing in games, like, oh, well, have you considered the repercussions of what's going on in zone 3 right now? And you're like, what the heck is zone 3? Like, I don't know what zone 3 is. So there's definitely some dangers there. Um, but opportunity for just people finding the things that they love, which I'm excited about. I compare it a little bit to music. For me, I find it so hard to find new music that I like, and I want to find new music, right? I kind of ask people. I use Google recommendation services, like just put it on start radio and hope that it gives me good stuff, but I can't explain. Like I've tried researching, like what even is this genre, this like post-punk bubblegum core or whatever. They do have language for that, but same with music. Like I know what I want to feel, right? Like I want to feel pumped up and excited and like happy, like a pop thing, but catchy and with a certain type of vocals. Like there's ways to break all that down, but um, so there's ways to break it down, I think, that can be more experiential too. Like we're talking about an insider language, and the mechanical language is very important. But if we can break it down for more words that we're more comfortable with, like I want to feel very relaxed. I don't want to be. I want someone to win at the end of it, but I don't want to feel like I got screwed over. I just want to feel like, okay, yeah, you did good. I did good. We all kind of did the stuff of the game and we had a good time. Or on the flip side, I want to feel cutthroat, like we're clawing our way to victory.
Hmm. Yeah, you went over a lot of good things there. And well, I also agree about the music. 'Cause, like, I'm like, I like a lot of music, but how many bands does Spotify have to like suggest to me before I actually like it?
Right. And I mean, I will say, and people say this about games, you have to listen to the song. No matter how highly recommended it comes, you have to listen to it to know if you like it. You have to play a game to know if you like it. Music is a little easier because you just like put on your playlist and listen to 100 songs in a day. Games is a little trickier, but I think what it all comes down to is, we don't have infinite time, and especially getting new gamers into games. Someone having a bad experience because their expectations, maybe they've played Uno and Go Fish before, and you give them a card game and it doesn't match their expectations, they can think that board games are bad. So if we had a way to say, like, be a curator for their experiences, right? A concierge for board games. And I did a little bit of this at Mox when we used to run the library there. And I was like, what kind of things are you into? What kind of games do you usually play? And there's a lot of ways to feel around it. But if I could just say, like, how do you want to feel today? Like, it looks like you're on a date, right? Do you, you probably don't want to be at each other's throats, or not talk for 30 minutes, right? There's a lot of two-player games. You just stare at the board and you don't communicate, right? And that's a very different experience than one where you're talking and laughing, right?
Yeah, that is a super good point. Like about like if you're on a date, you know, there's all these games that you do not want to play because
Yeah.
like what player interaction do you want to have outside the game? Because like the inside the game determines like how you're going to deal with them outside the game as
Yeah.
well. So yeah, that's super interesting. Did you learn anything as you were being this like concierge service at Mox?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. So much. One of the things, people don't have the language. Like that was the biggest takeaway from that is so many times a person or a couple or a group would come up and say, we want to play a game that's fun. Of course, as a retail employee hearing this for the 100th time, it's like, oh, we don't have those. Yeah, these, everything you see here, no fun games. Sorry. Because the answer is like all games are fun. Like we wouldn't have them here if they weren't fun. But what they're actually saying is a lot of stuff. There's a lot to unpack there of I don't want to look like an idiot in front of my friends. So that's one of the biggest things for newer gamers, especially, is I don't want to sit there with a rule book for 15 minutes trying to figure it out and explaining it to my friends while their eyes glaze over, which is not communicated on a box, right? Like us as designers and people in the hobby can parse. It's like, well, it's a 60-minute game, which means it's actually a 2-hour game, which means all these things, right? But for someone who's very new to it, they won't necessarily pick up on those clues. So yeah, first someone would say like, I want something fun. I want something that I can figure out, that has that thematic thing. Like, oh, you're putting your cherries into the cherry basket. That makes sense. All these cards are cherries. I'm putting them into the basket. I can figure that out. And even if I don't read the short rules, right? So I can kind of pitch it really fast. And even if I don't read through the whole rule book, if I just kind of fiddle through it and miss some things, I can still have fun. And I might figure out later, it's like, oh, we're doing this thing wrong, but I don't have to sit there and refer back to the rules too, right? It's like, okay, so if the worm goes into the black hole and while the sun is at this rotation, those kind of edge case type things. And yeah, people look for games, again, based on the experience, and they'll communicate the experience they want in certain terms, right? Like, I'm on a date. Again, like we said, there's a lot of stuff packed into there. When you say I'm on a date, I'm on a first date, right? What you're actually saying is I am looking for an experience where I can get to know this person, where we can have a framework within which to go back and forth within a bounded space where we're not going to end up hating each other by the end of it. Like, right, there's a lot that's wrapped up into that thing. Or, I'm with my young kids, and you can look and see as the kids look a little energetic, right? So it's like, I want to have a game where I have a baby or something, right? I want to have a game where if I have to go to the bathroom or take the kids to the bathroom, that I can come back to it and jump back into it. It's okay if I miss a little bit of a time. It's a group thing. Maybe the kids can participate. So there's a lot you can unpack, about the kinds of experiences that people are looking for and the feelings that they're looking for in their games.
Mm-hmm. So we've talked a lot about what game feel like is, and like what like it incorporates like a ton of different like things that we've broken down. At what point do you start caring about game feel in your design process?
I would say that is the first thing. At least for me, and as I start to design more games and look to make new feelings as a designer, that's one of my core goals is, can I make something that feels a certain way? And that might be, again, that experience curve, tension, drama, those kinds of things. Or it can be, I want them to feel like a cat, almost role play as a cat. Or I want them to feel, I want a game that feels like drinking hot cocoa on a cold winter day, right? They're very, very lofty things. And I think it can be tricky to get. You can go too far with that, with the tools that we have in current times for designing board games. But again, once you put the game in front of your very first playtest, looking at people in the moment, are they smiling? Are they frowning? Are they concentrating? Are they distracted? All of these come down to game feel and seeing how that changes over time. Like, are they focused on their turn and then distracted when it's not their turn? Are they, um, shouting or laughing? Do they draw a card and they're frustrated? Like there's a lot of energy around it. Are they engaged but not hyper focused? Just like quietly engaged. So I think this is something we're all already doing. We're watching people in playtests. We're getting feedback from the playtests. I think we just tend to talk about it in more mechanical terms, right? Like we often don't dig too much into those feelings. Like, well, when I placed my third tile, I didn't have a lot of choices to make, and it felt like the decision was made for me. And again, it's because we don't really talk about our feelings as humans enough. I would say it's like, what it really is I felt frustrated. I wanted to do this thing. You gave me all the pieces to do this thing, and then you didn't let me do the thing that you said I could do. So I felt incredibly frustrated in that moment. So yeah, I would love to see just more. And I think it's great for playtesting feedback too. Too often you'll get into the nitty gritty, the edge cases of, well, this card was broken, whatever. But focusing more in on that, getting away from solutions, what were your experiences in that? I think experiences can be a little less fraught than feelings. Feelings like, oh, I'm feeling sad today. It's like, well, it's not exactly what we're going for, but more granular of experience. I was experiencing frustration. I was experiencing excitement, and distancing it from yourself, because it can feel vulnerable, right? It can be tough to talk about things, especially when it's wrapped up with you as a person, right? Like, well, whenever I play abstract strategy games, I'm bad at them and I get very stressed out. All of that's in the back of your head as you're playtesting this abstract strategy game. So to be able to separate and put some distance in there and talk about these things, and then as designers to ask the questions, right? Like, what was your experience here? I noticed this happened where you hesitated here. What was going through your mind? There's a lot of questions that you can ask to kind of get at those squishy bits.
I really like that, the what was going through your mind when.
Yeah.
I need to do that more often, and it's especially hard now that I'm doing mostly virtual playtesting, because like a lot of my playtesting, like when it's in person, is just like watching people and like seeing where their eyes go and what they're focusing on and like maybe their emotions on their face. But since going the virtual route, like I don't always like even have video. Like I try to do video if I can, but like sometimes it's just voice. Do you have any like tips on how to like kind of like get what the game feel is from the players without having any of those like body language cues?
It's tough. It's definitely practice, and working on in voice inflections, just listening very closely to people. It's I don't want to liken it exactly to being blind, but in a way, it's one of your senses is taken away, and you need to focus on honing the other one. So just like hearing the people pausing, like, hey, what's going on? Like, are you a lot more communication, which is good. I think we don't always communicate enough. Like it can be good in a playtest just to sit back and watch, but it can also be good in the moment to capture that and say, like, because they can forget it by the end of the test, like so sitting there and not playing any cards, just ask questions, right? Are you like, hey, I noticed that this seems to be a little hard for you. What are you thinking right now? Again, what's going through your head right now? And yeah, just working on the questions, communication, having people going to each of your play testers and giving them a lot of space to talk about the thing. And we can eventually get to a lot of these things in words. It's definitely not as easy or as great as being able to just see their expressions. But yeah, like you can't run a play test now and just expect, like in the real physical world, people just, oh, and here's this and this, and the words tend to flow really easily. It can be stilted and hard to get that flow. Actually, I will say one of the things I really have been glad to pick up during digital play testing is framing before the test even starts. So I like to ask people, what percent done is your game? What kind of feedback are you looking for? Which is good in person too. But sometimes we get lazy. We just put the game down. We're kind of joking around. But more so than ever in the digital format, if you can just prime people to test in a certain way, you just have to be a lot more focused about it, right? To say, hey, we can't just lay this out and see whatever comes up. This is the first play test of this game. I want to know if it's fun. This game is 90% done. These are the systems that I'm testing out here. And yeah, really just focus people's attention and keep communicating throughout it to make sure that you get all the information.
Yeah, I love framing. Well, for one thing, like my graphic design is always terrible. Like that's just a fact. It's and I've learned, like, because of this, is that like I will tell playtesters, like, at the beginning and like probably 5 or 6 times during the playtest, like, hey, this is terrible, and I do know that it's terrible. So don't tell me about the graphic design. Graphic
Yeah.
design is not what we're playtesting today.
Right.
Did you know? Not playtesting the graphic design. We're actually playtesting this balance thing and how balanced you think it is, not how balanced you think the graphic design is, because that is bad.
Yeah.
Repeating it because like some people like even though like I'll say that like every 10 minutes, they'll be like, but Carla, did you know? And I'll be like, I do know. I'm gonna interrupt you. Like
Let me stop you there.
yeah. Some people just can't not. But yeah, the framing is so important, especially like if you get them into the right like mindset. Like, oh, okay, so we're testing this, so I should like interact with these elements maybe
Yeah.
more or less, and what things do I care about and what things am I focusing on? So yeah, I definitely agree with the whole framing thing.
Yeah, you'll see that. I definitely see that when I'm testing with more experienced designers. We have people in our playtest groups from who it's their very first game to people who have multiple published games. And you definitely see the difference in efficiency there. And I think the focus is a good thing. And I think we can learn a lot from that because as a beginner designer coming in, people are throwing all this stuff. They're like, oh, have you considered getting rid of this whole system and putting this other system in here? And the feedback sessions can go very long in person, especially and sometimes you get the best ideas for your games, right? Someone's like, oh, do you think about this? I didn't think about this. That's exactly what I needed to know. But sometimes you go down these rabbit holes. And I have noticed in digital, you don't do that quite as much. In a physical playtest, hour or more of feedback, sometimes you get wrapped up in it. But in digital, people don't have quite that stamina just to stick with it. So you do get a little bit more cut to the quick, a little more quickly.
Yeah, I know I've gone down like a number of rabbit holes, or like tried to like cut them off on the different rabbit holes. So yeah, like I definitely had less of those. I'm not sure. Yeah, it's probably the whole like they're in front of a computer and there's other things happening.
Yeah.
David did have a question. How far are you willing to stray from the intended feeling of a game for the sake of making sure that the mechanics of the game work as perfectly as they can? And when it gets to that point, are you more apt to redo theme or redo mechanics?
That's an excellent question. I think the more I design games, the more I come to know is this feel is what's going to sell the game. Like capturing something that other games don't capture is what's going to just make people go nuts for the game. So you can make a mechanically very solid game, you can make a thematically very solid game, uh, but without something there, which is the spark or the core to it. And that's really hard because I can't do that. I can't, as a designer, be like, I'm gonna come up with this mechanic that just does this really cool thing. At least where I am in my design journey, most of the times I stumble upon it, right? And I think when you find that thing and people are fixated on that and excited about it, then that it goes above everything, right? If you can capture something and people are saying like, yeah, I love this part of it, then you throw everything out into the trash, right? Because it's a magical thing, and not many games can do that. Um, outside of that, I would say I think that the mechanics and theme are secondary to that, can kind of inform it. The one other thing is mechanics and theme is never going to be perfect. Like I keep coming back to the knitting thing. I want more yarn craft schemes. I don't know. I'm just fixated on that right now. But it's never going to feel exactly. You're never if you're trying to capture that feeling exactly, it's never going to be 100% because of the abstraction of making a board game, right? So you will have to make some sacrifices and some abstractions. And that's really the core of game design, right? Finding this feeling, finding the ways that you can abstract it to capture it, and putting it all together into a package that makes sense for people.
Mhm. Yeah, I definitely agree with that and the whole like following the spark
Mhm.
idea. Like there's plenty of times where like I get my initial game or like maybe I've play tested it a few times, but like I have this idea of what it will be, and then it gets to the table. And
Yep.
then we figure out what the actual cool part of the game is, or like we try to identify that. And like normally it's just like, well, I wanted it to be this, but the game obviously wants it to be something else. So I'm just going to go where the game tells me to go, and hopefully we'll get somewhere great.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I'm just testing one now. I was so excited about it. I'm like, okay, needle in a haystack. There's one needle card in the whole thing, and then somebody has it, and you don't know who has it, and you can kind of like look and maybe steal a card or something, and it's going to be super super fun. And then we play tested it, and it's like, oh, that's actually hard to communicate because like I had the needle and just no one saw that I had it. So I was over here like I have it, no one knows, and they're over there not knowing anything. And then I won the game. They're like, oh, okay, well that I couldn't really do anything about that. So yeah, even if you know your field that you're going for, it can be tough to make it come across.
Mhm. Yeah. And like, I don't know, I've never been able to just force it to be a
Yeah.
certain feel.
Hmm.
Yeah, hopefully it goes somewhere. Amelia had a question. How do you think the experience curve changes over time as players play a game multiple times?
Ooh, that's a great question. I love that. Yeah, that's such an important point too. Talking about the experience of a game, the feel of a game, how a game feels, the curve of it over the course of playing it, and then the meta curve, right? How it feels the first time you play versus the 50th time that you play. Again, I think Magic is a great example of this. I play hundreds and hundreds of hours of this game, and like the very first time you play it, just I do a thing and I made it and it's confusing and I made some creatures and I guess that's kind of cool. And then the 2000th time that you play it, right, where you're like, okay, so they left open one red mana, and in this particular set, at this particular moment, these are the two cards they could possibly have in their hand, and I can play this creature. Yeah, it can be incredibly different based on that, and that's again for if you're really trying to make a solid game design. That's something that's where evergreens come from, right? Where you can either say, this game consistently delivers this experience every time I play it. I have this solid experience, or it's the type of game that I can dig into. And the more I play it, I start to find new layers to it. So It's really important to understand where your game is there and to think about that as you're playing. Like most of the time for playtesting, you have that first player experience. So that's important to test for. Test with new players, test with players who have played maybe 5 or 6 times. And designer groups are great for that, right? To go back and forth and have someone really dig into it so you can uncover what that's like.
Well, I definitely agree. Like, I think too many designers do one or the other, where they're either consistently playtesting with people that are new to the game, or they consistently playtest with the same group. But doing like a good mix of that is definitely like the best in my experience.
Yeah.
Well, and so we were talking about like experienced players, like the more you play. So sometimes there's also the whole fact of who you're playing with.
Oh gosh, yeah.
A game can be like completely different depending on like what the meta game is between the players. Uh,
Yeah.
like
Oh
I don't attack people,
my
but if I'm playing games like Jack from Cardboard Herald, like he is super nice.
God.
He is
Hmm.
like the one person I am willing to just like, okay, I'm just going to attack him consistently. I don't care if I lose. My game I'm playing right now is making him lose.
Yeah.
We both know this. There's a social contract there. It's
Yeah.
perfectly okay. Um, but
Uh,
yeah, like when a game has that like ability to like handle that, like it will play with different play groups very
uh,
well.
this is so important. And I think this is honestly one of the biggest issues I see with newer designers who've worked on a design where they've tested extensively with a small group of family or friends. I will come into this game. I am not always the best to play with. I'm a main maxer as a designer. I just want to know how to figure this freaking game out. And like I just focus and like putting together all the pieces. So and getting frustrated, if I think things poorly designed, right? It's like, well, this card was totally broken and unfair. Um, Trying to get better at that. But I'll come to these games and just instantly break them, right? They're like, well, this game usually plays in 45 minutes with my friends and family. And 2 hours later, I'm like, well, yeah, it plays in 45 minutes because you've come up with the language and you have all these mental shortcuts. For a new player to figure it out, there's these huge hurdles to it. And you're putting in opportunities for me to bring the game to a halt. Like this game's like, okay, you can spread out and put all of these plants all over the place. That's not how you win. I'm like, okay, I'm not going to win this game. I'm not going to bring this game to a conclusion because I'm out here putting the plants down. And if that doesn't push the game to conclusion, this game is going to go on forever because you've given me this opportunity to do this silly thing over here. It's like, well, you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to do these other things that will make the game end. I'm like, well, just plants. Just making more plants.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, I love that. So I have specific play testers, like my father-in-law. I always have him play my games because he does not do the logical thing.
Yeah.
Like, so it's not that it's not logical. It's not logical to me.
Yeah.
He has a plan and he's gonna do it. Like, I had a Space 4X game where he went and he got stuck, and I was like, what? How did you get stuck? And he's like, I did all these things, and it was like, that doesn't make any sense. Because of him, I put in things so like there's another action that so you will never get stuck regardless of what you do.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
yeah, you need those players that will like are the different like completely different logical stance than you are just to see what happens.
Yeah.
Like you have to follow you have to follow the rules, but like that doesn't mean it's a straight line every time.
Yeah. It's like, okay, so you flew to the planet using up all your fuel, and that planet doesn't make any fuel, so you have no way to get off that planet, and you're stuck there now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I went through that conversation with him, and he's like, "Yep, this
People
is
do
what I
that. People
want
do
to do.
that. Yeah.
It's the outcome I want." And like what he wanted was to like destroy someone else, but then it was like, well, now you're stuck, but now the game is better for it. So
Yeah. Yeah.
If anyone has any last questions, you can put them in the chat. But Emma, we're almost done with the hour, or we are. Where can people find you after this?
I'm at Emma Larkins pretty much everywhere. Twitter is where I'm most active. Also have emmalarkins.com, my website. You can go to ludology.net to see more about our podcast there. I also do weekly streaming on Gen Con TV for board game news. But again, most of that's going to come through my Twitter. So always happy to connect and chat there about board game design.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Emma. This was fantastic. And thank all of you for being here and asking great questions. I hope you all have a great rest of your weekend. If you want to participate in the Discord for the game design live chats, it's at weirddraftgames.com/Discord. So have a great rest of the week.
Thanks everyone for having me. I actually got to run, but this has been super fun hanging out with you all today.